What happened to Naruto's art style? The manga used to look like this, but now it looks like this. Which is weird because the mangaka for Boruto, Kishimoto, has been an assistant to Kishimoto since the early days of Naruto. And yet when you compare panels of the Fourth Great Ninja War to panels of Boruto now, there's clearly a big difference. Naturally, the question a lot of people are faced with is whether Naruto's art style has changed for the better, or if it's really gone downhill. So in this video, I'm going to analyze every stage of Naruto's art style, explain how it compares to the art in Boruto, and discuss the impact Kishimoto's art has made on the manga industry 20 years later. Since I'm only concerned with the manga, this video will not discuss all of the stylistic choices made in the anime. And because this video will look at the entire manga, be warned that there may be some pretty major spoilers. With that out of the way, let's start by looking at the first stage of Naruto's art style. The first stage, which I would call early Naruto, starts with volume 1 and ends right around volume 8. Honestly, I still don't know how I feel about this stage, because on the one hand, I think it's pretty clear that out of the big three, Naruto looks the most like Dragon Ball. Which is a cool thing to say because in a lot of ways you could argue that Naruto took over the torch, so to speak. For example, while you can see plenty examples of this in One Piece and Bleach, Naruto feels the most like Dragon Ball when it comes to the goofy reaction faces. Especially when he does the one where the character's teeth suddenly get all big. It's something that always stays in Naruto, but especially in early Naruto, it's very much a staple of the art. But more so than the silly faces. What I love about early Naruto are the character designs. And funny enough, it's in this stage where Kishimoto's designs looked the most realistic. And let me explain what I mean. When you look at these early 2000s manga, they all had basically the same aesthetic. They had all these caricature-like characters where they were cartoony and had exaggerated features. In one way, it allowed these manga to resemble the simple art style of Dragon Ball, but at the same time, it also served as a way to be a bit more visually expressive. Like, you take a manga like Shaman King, and that is clearly much goofier looking than Dragon Ball. But when you look at Naruto during this time, oddly enough, it's the more realistic looking of the bunch. For example, here's a spread from chapter 15. On its own, it seems pretty cartoonish with the spiky hair and crazy designs. But compare it to the exaggerated designs of Shaman King and it looks pretty normal. Compare it to the polygonal characters of early Bleach and it looks pretty normal. And then obviously it has a bit more detail than the art from early One Piece. Which is why I would argue that out of these 2000s manga, Naruto is the most realistic looking. Yet at the same time, the simplicity and roundness of its characters still makes it look the most like Dragon Ball. So considering it manages to juggle both of these achievements, I have to give credit to early Naruto's unique aesthetic. That being said, early Naruto is far from perfect. If I were to say Naruto was famous for one thing, it would probably be the fights and choreography. And while I would say that they look great in all of Naruto, they don't look their best in the first stage. But before I say more on that, make sure to like the video if you're enjoying it so far. It's the easiest way to support the channel, and it helps spread the video to other viewers like you. Now, here's how I would describe the action in early Naruto. At this point in the manga, it's got great choreography and paneling, but it's not really visceral. And here's what I mean. Take these two pages from chapter 7. Something Kishimoto does really well is that he breaks down each part of this fight. You see Sasuke rush Kakashi, then Kakashi looks before Sasuke lands a kick, then he lands, then Kakashi catches the kick, then Sasuke lands another kick before he goes to do a spin. By breaking it up in pieces like this rather than skipping to the good parts, Kishimoto makes the fight feel like a real fight with all of the many clashes and exchanges. Something that's especially noteworthy considering he did this even in his early work, even when many mangaka still struggle to do this. Now the downside to his action scenes are the physics of the fights. So in this same example, the fight as a whole feels great, but each panel is sort of flat and as a result, they're not really visceral. As another example, look at this page from chapter 23. Here, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on, but Kishimoto draws it with no real center. Nothing that draws the reader's attention. It's all kind of flat and as a result, it looks cool, but you can't really feel the action. Fortunately, this changes right around the Shonen exams, but before that, I do just have one more more thing to add. The more I read Naruto, the more I realize Kishimoto loves backgrounds. With a lot of manga, the backgrounds almost feel like an afterthought. Then you have manga like Black Clover where they go above and beyond by delivering stylized backgrounds. Naruto is a very happy medium where the backgrounds aren't really stylized, but they're full of plenty of detail. You can tell that Kishimoto loves backgrounds because unlike other mangaka that emphasize characters and spreads, Kishimoto often makes them small and leaves more space for the scenery. Something to keep in mind, as I noticed it right away in early Naruto. But on that note, let's move on to what I would argue is the best stage of Naruto's art style. Stage 2 starts around volume 9 and continues right until the time skip in volume 27. The first thing I noticed about this second stage is how the characters slowly become more stylized, but there's also a heightened level of detail. For example, here's a cover of Team 7 from chapter 4. Now let's compare that to this page of them in 172. Clearly there's a big difference. The hair, while still spiky, is a bit more toned down. The faces have less angles and are generally rounder overall. Instead of these huge pupils, now the eyes are circles with little dots in the middle. The designs are more balanced and closer to what they eventually look like after the time skip. And like I said, you start to see a lot more detail. For example, some of my favorite panels are ones like this one of Naruto in chapter 75. Something like this is full of detail that instantly conveys Naruto's emotion of anger, making the art that much more expressive. And it's not just the characters. There's also more detail in the action as well. One spread I really like is this one from chapter 143. You can tell there's a big difference as there's a clear sense of perspective and you can actually feel the speed and torque in Guy's kick. I also love this panel of the Rasengan in chapter 167, as not only does the Rasengan draw in your attention, but thanks to the detail you can see how it draws in the very air around it, adding to the energy behind this attack. All of this heightened detail comes together in what I still think is the peak of Naruto's art, Naruto versus Sasuke. You have pages like this one where you see Ninetales and it looks absolutely insane. On top of that, you have choreography and paneling that makes it still one of the best looking fights in the entire series. But following this fight, we enter the time skip, which proves to be a weird shift for the art style. And let me explain what I mean. So the third stage, which we can conveniently call Shippuden, even though that's an anime thing, starts with volume 28 and ends right around the Ninja War. Now at first this might seem like a pretty obvious downgrade, as for the most part, the pages seem much less detailed or expressive. But let me explain why I don't really think that's necessarily true. If I were to sum it up in a few words, I'd say this stage of Naruto is really good whenever there's action, and everything else is messy. Not bad, just messy. And I use the word messy because this messy art style is another legacy that would influence newer manga. But we'll talk about that legacy more later in the video. Like I said, in between the fights, the art style is kind of messy. The backgrounds usually aren't as detailed and the characters are simpler, making the overall art seem more black and white and flatter by comparison. For example, look at these pages from chapter 306. It doesn't look that messy, but it's almost got no color. Then you have pages like chapter 344 where Sasuke really looks pretty good, but if you look at his hair long enough, it starts to look kind of off. Something about the shape of his hair just isn't right. You can also see it in this page from chapter 348, where the scenery has almost no detail and the thick line work contrasts pretty heavily with all of the empty space. Now, I call this the messy style, but in all honesty, it's not so much messy as it is simple. Sketchy wouldn't be the right word because that'd be more like Chainsaw Man. And simple isn't right either because, as you can see in early Naruto, you can be simple and still look clean. I guess minimalist would be the right word, but that's not as catchy as messy. Now, like I said, as messy as this stage can be, the action is just as good as ever. For example, the Sakura and Chiyo vs Sasori fight looks insane. The ambush at the bridge against Orochimaru looks incredible. Of course, you also have to mention one of Naruto's best fights, Sasuke vs Itachi. And there's a bunch more, but that brings us to the final stage before Boruto, which we can just call the Fourth Great Ninja War, or the final arc. This stage doesn't change all that much, but there are a couple of changes that make it stand out from the previous stage. First of all, I would say it's less messy than the previous stage. I can't say for sure why it is exactly. I think part of it is because there's so much on the pages, and so you don't have that crazy white and black contrast anymore. Overall, it's much more consistent, which is crazy to think about because with most manga like One Piece or Black Clover, you can see things become less organized whenever there's a big war arc. But with Naruto, it's almost the opposite. On a similar note, the paneling is a bit messier, kind of like you can see in One Piece and Paramount War, or more famously in Wano, but interestingly enough, it's much better than either of those arcs. For these reasons, artistically speaking, I'm gonna go out on a limb and say Kishimoto does a much better job of handling his big battle than Oda does with most of his. Hot take, I know, but when you've read more than a dozen of these big war arcs in Shonen manga, and then you revisit the 4th Ninja War, it's crazy to see just how well Kishimoto balances the paneling. But on that note, this is basically the last discussion surrounding Kishimoto, because when we move to Boruto, the manga is handed over to Ikemoto. And while I probably should do the usual thing where I get all analytical and objective, I'm just gonna go on a rant for a bit, because I don't think the art in Boruto is bad, but it's definitely a bad fit for Naruto. It's not even that Ikemoto is a bad artist. He's very consistent because Boruto has looked the same for, what, like 5 years? And going back to early Naruto, you can tell his art style back then was the same. It's just so different from Kishimoto's style. Like, there's one panel from the Chunin exams back in Naruto where they show these people in the stands, and I had to screenshot it because I was like, dude, that is totally Ikemoto. Panels like this just seem so alien from Kishimoto's work. Which is weird because he's worked for Kishimoto from the very beginning. But I mean, the line work isn't nearly as solid. It's got this sketchy texture to it that compared to Kishimoto's just looks so ugly. The choreography isn't as good since Ikemoto doesn't break down the fights. And the paneling is so boring. I think the main problem is that this is Naruto. Like, if this were Ikemoto's own manga, it would look fine. Like, he drew a couple of anniversary pictures in GTA style, and they actually seem like they would be perfect for GTA. Part of the problem is that Ikemoto just doesn't take the same approach where it resembles the art of Dragon Ball. Ikemoto actually drew Dragon Ball for the anniversary art gallery, and you can tell it's just not his style, which is why I just don't like the art in Boruto. It's just not what Naruto is supposed to look like. But in any event, these are all the changes to Naruto's art style. So as I close out the video, I do want to leave you with some final thoughts. Obviously, the action is a big takeaway, but specifically, the action is so good because of the dynamic choreography and paneling that would come to directly influence manga like Jujutsu Kaisen. You also have the messy style that would come later, which can be off-putting but almost imitates the style of animation in anime like you can see in parts of One Piece. It's for this reason that I think newer manga like Kagurabachi have gone for this messy art style. But that's just my theory. The character designs in Naruto are also amazing. Characters like Gaara will always stand out because they're so simple, and yet they are full of personality, immediately expressing the fundamental ideas of the character. On a similar note, Kishimoto is also incredible when it comes to character portraits, something Toriyama was also good at. But something I think Kishimoto excels in that goes underrated are, again, the backgrounds. For example, something everyone will remember is the stuff in the Village of Rain, but there's a bunch of other examples like Naruto visiting Konoha after the time skip. Like I said before, I almost think Kishimoto likes drawing scenery just as much as characters. Which is another nod to Toriyama, who put a lot of work into placing fights in these big open fields and cities. So, as you can see, Kishimoto pays a lot of respect to Dragon Ball, but in so many ways draws something that is clearly very much his own. His art has served as one of the most dynamic and influential in the industry, and it's why Naruto is one of the best looking manga of all time. But now I'd like to hear what you think. How would you rate Naruto's art style? How does it compare to other manga? Share your thoughts and see what everyone else has to say down in the comments. I'll pick my favorite and share it as comment of the week on my community tab. And if you'd like another discussion like this one, then check out my video on Boruto. In that video, I discuss the state of the Boruto manga and fandom. You can find that video in the playlist linked right here. Until then, thank you for watching, and I hope to hear from you soon.